Okay. Thank you all for coming this evening, and thank you to our audience online. One of the unexpected side effects of COVID was the acceleration of something that I suspect was going to happen eventually anyway, which is that we are multimodal now. So people can tune in from across the country or across the world. To these programs and also not have to see them in the moment in which we are projecting them. But thank you all for coming in person because actually these things are so much more dynamic with audience here. I'm Amy Gilman. I'm the director at the Chazen Museum of Art. And I'm really delighted to be here tonight. Before I get started, I have a little bit of business, and most importantly, I actually want to acknowledge the people for whom this land is their original space. The University of Wisconsin occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejope since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory, and decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and the state governments repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. And today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. And I think it's really important to acknowledge where this place has been. And that is actually very important to this project, too. So about the Mancipation exhibition, if you have, I hope that you have all been to see it. It is on view through June 25th. Also, the Resource and Ruin, Wisconsin's Enduring Landscape exhibition, last day is this coming Sunday, so be sure to visit it before it closes. It's on the second floor in the Garfield Galleries. Upcoming programming, there is an opening reception at the end of April, on April 27th, for the annual MFA show. Premonitions, new works by Monty Little. He's the MFA student this year. And in regards to the Romancipation exhibition project, we're having the celebratory Jump and Funk. We'll be bringing back Rich Medina for that. And Mark will be back, and Sanford Biggers will be back, and we will have great performances. And we are hoping, weather dependent, that we will be in here and potentially outside. Is that right? Or no, we'll see. May 4th, it's a little bit either way. But that will be, although the exhibition will stay up until the end of June, in fact, it will stay up until right about Juneteenth this year. That is, we wanted to have the final celebration for it at the time when the students are still here. And then I also just want to mention, this isn't a specific program, but the Meet Me at the Chazen podcast that we have produced as part of this project, put together by Giannifer Fields, our storyteller in residence here with the rest of the marketing and communications team, it has become a really spectacular way to get introduced to the full scope of the project. And because it rolls out week over week, you start with, I think I'm actually the shortest episode, right? So it's like starts at this very high level, like, oh, this is the way the project was. And I'm like, I don't know, like, it's like 8 minutes long or something. And then Sanford Biggers speaks. And then I think it's Mark is next or Candy is next, and then Mark is next, and this week it's Kate Wamberg, who is the exhibitions project coordinator here, and you really get this like sense of how deep the project has actually gone, and it's a beautiful way to highlight members of the staff and members of the team who are not those of us who are typically out front, because of course nothing at this scale, in fact nothing that we do, happens here without the work of every single person who has been involved in this project. And if you want a sense of the scope of that, you can look at the credits that are at the end of the exhibition, which is quite incredible. But tonight, we are here to have a director's conversation with one of our, Mark and I call ourselves co-conspirators, collaborators. Mark Hines is one of the founding members of Mask Consortium, and these are our project partners for Emancipation. Mark and I first met when he came to the Chazen in 2019, invited by Candy Waterloo to perform with Moon Medicine, which is Sanford Bigger's concept band, during an exhibition that we were hosting of Sanford's work during that summer. Mark has extensive experience in creative technology, digital media, computer science, and his career portfolio, I bet you didn't know I was going to cover this, did you? Includes being the founder and creator of the live streaming platform Virtual Live Experiences. He has also served as the vice president of creative technology at Russell Simmons 360hiphop.com, where he was instrumental in the conceptualization and development of their new media platform, and later vice president of strategy after BET.com acquired the startup. From 94 to 99, Hines worked at JP Morgan, where he specialized in the development of unique technology applications. And while at JP Morgan, and you'll see that this is part of Mark's very interesting intersection of skills and interests, he also maintained a music production company, Poisoned Ivy Entertainment, which did work for major labels including Warner Brothers, MCA, Columbia, and Def Jam. And his formal discipline is computer science, which he studied with a concentration in music. So always an intersection of technology and creativity. Concentration in music at Princeton University, where he received his BA. So Mark's expertise has been absolutely instrumental in making this project happen. And it is my pleasure to both welcome him as one of the key professional colleagues and now one of my dear friends to the stage. Thank you, Mark.
Hey, everybody.
All right. So I will tell you that Mark and I have lots of conversations about many things, and they tend to go off in lots of different directions. There's not usually a lot of airtime between the two of us. But one of the things that we wanted to do today, we wanted to keep this less of a formal talk about the project. There are so many ways for you to get the background about how we got here and where it originated, et cetera, that we didn't actually want to rehearse that again. So if you haven't gotten that yet, you can certainly go on the exhibition's website. You can go into the exhibition itself. There's lots of ways to do that. But I really wanted to get in depth on things that we actually haven't been able to do yet publicly, which is really talk even more about our process to get here, some of the things that have been surprising about that process, some of the avenues maybe that we didn't decide to take, whether that's for time or other reasons, and some of the things that we're looking forward to doing going forward. Some of the things that we've learned from this, because when we started, I don't think that any of us had anticipated really what the project has become. And before I get to my first prompt for Mark, I will say that one of the most important decisions that was made early was that we would record all of the Zooms that we did as planning for this process. And I mean, over 2+ years, that's like a lot of Zooms. So that idea that we were going to record that, and that really came from Mask, then also became part of we really want, as a museum and as creative in a creative space, to be more open and vulnerable about the process that we undergo to think about objects in our collection and how difficult that is, especially now, I think, and what that means in my point of view to be a museum today. And I don't know actually what the intention was originally when we started having those conversations. But Mark, maybe you could start by maybe talking a little bit about how Mask formed, and then how, from your perspective, how did we get to the first conversations?
Hello again, everybody. That's a zinger for the first one. Because Mask did form after we initially met. So that's after the Moon Medicine performance in 2019 that you
Right.
referenced. And I think in hearing that question came with Sanford. He's the primary artist, even though we collaborate. And he was really in an expansion mode. Not that that has really ended at this point. But we could start to see how some of his aspirations were thwarted by his own success. If you're in demand as a fine artist, it's a great thing. But the challenge becomes that your galleries often are asking for the same work
Right.
that you don't want to do necessarily anymore, or maybe you want to grow and do something different. But the market has a desire for something in particular. So the gallery system does kind of keep you in
Yeah.
some kind of constraint to meet its commercial aspirations. And Sanford isn't limited by that and wasn't going to be limited by that. We needed to create a vehicle that could allow him to do more challenging, bigger ideas that weren't caught up in that, put it that
Yeah.
way. He is a professor as well, and has taught for many years. So the educational cross section of art museums, universities, and art was a much more fertile space to explore expansive ideas. So Mask was formed as a vehicle to do more creative, more bold, challenging projects that we didn't think more or the current partners would be able to get their heads around.
But, and the current partners getting their heads around. I mean, I think that so one of the things that Sanford talks about in the podcast, and he's also I think mentioned to some of the reporters who've asked questions about this, is like the idea that part of what he had to do with this project, and probably for many things that you guys are working on, is stop controlling some of the things that he, as an individual visual artist producing objects, would normally like control, right? And trust that if you're going to do these bigger things, that you have partners that actually are in sync about that. Because honestly, like I don't think that you couldn't do this project. We couldn't have achieved this project if it was just like what we originally started with, and we were like, okay, well, Sanford's going to do a response work, which is like the very beginning. It's very typical, right? And he's done those kinds of things before. But so it's interesting that like you all there had been this coalescence of creative thinkers, but not necessarily people who were in the visual art space.
Some are, some aren't.
Right.
As it relates to Mask, I
Right.
think the strength is in the diversity
Yeah.
of different skills. You know, we call it the sauce, and
Sauce.
the sauce comes from all around the network, and in people countering each other's ideas, not in an argument, but in a dialogue to find really what the best combination of all those options are, whether that's the personnel that's going to work on something or what we're going to do when we're working on something. So it's partially informed by the fine arts and visual space, but it's also very much informed by music production, hip hop in particular, although there are musicians of all stripes in our network, performing arts, education, and technology.
So I want to talk about network for a minute, because one of the things that was so interesting to me over the course of this is that you all have set up a structure for your company, for Mask, that is not strictly traditionally hierarchical. And it's obviously deliberate. and it has impact, right, in both how you work and how those ideas all come together, but also, how you leverage your network, right? You have described to me that people come in and out, right, of certain things, right? When they're interested in something, their focus is over here, and maybe there's a group of people working on this. Is that something that was deliberate in the beginning? Like you knew you didn't want to set it up? Like you have a CEO, right? But it's not command and control like a pretty traditional company. At least that's not my perception, or am I wrong about that?
No, I think you're correct. It's deliberate. Frankly, the titles are for external interface. They're not for internal operations.
Right.
And the network model, I think this era of folks is now extremely familiar with social networks, but the network theory that I studied 20 years before social networks came to be completely informs how people interconnect as exemplified by social networks today.
Right.
So wrapping that strategic concept around how you source talent, how you engage people to propel ideas, and also a sort of breeding a lack of acceptance of a top-down only framework creates a different, really scientifically creates a different flow of information around the system. In my observation, it created a nimble nature to our group. We were able to move a lot faster around a particular problem to come up with a solution than larger organizations are just traditionally organized,
Right.
hierarchical, top down.
So you all basically started this in 2020. And was it that you had already been thinking about that, or was COVID like this sort of thing that pushed you in that space?
So Mask is the third iteration. It's the third era of, I call them creative collaborative networks, CCNs. The Marksman was a music production network focused primarily on music production for film, TV, advertising, records, but organized pretty much exactly the way that Mask is organized. And there was a network before that. So we had been using the framework functionally for many, many years prior. However, it is that structure and the tools that we used to communicate with each other that when COVID hit, enabled us to continue doing business as usual when everything else shut down. We were showing up to work every day.
Like you were already there because you don't have a physical building. You weren't already doing that.
We're dispersed across the earth. We have been. We've been video conferencing for 10 years prior to, and working in sort of a holographic visual manner to communicate ideas to each other through the internet for a long time. So we hit our stride actually when, it was culturally obviously problematic and it stopped everybody for me it was in a good way, but we were able to be highly functional when I know a lot of other folks from a business perspective, not in their personal lives, but the business just shutting down. We cannot continue to do our business because we don't know how to do it if it's not in that building.
So this is interesting because I want to point out this intersection of a group that actually was positioned right place, right time, right thing, right? To be able to just like leap into that moment. Now, we are situated right now in a building in a museum sector that could never have conceived of the concept of the idea that we were going to have to shut down the whole thing, that we were going to stop doing what we were doing, that we would ever be able to get off the kind of treadmill of planning and this is how we do things around here, because everybody was like, well, it's like so hard to change, right? You've been doing this way for like, it'll just take you forever. Well, just like people said, like the university would never, shut down. And at this university that there was like a lot of resistance to moving classes online. This is pre-COVID. And then all of a sudden, over spring break, in 2020. Like basically everything moved online, and not particularly gracefully. I mean, let's just acknowledge that, right? Like nobody was ready, like nobody over here was ready for that. But it's interesting because from my perspective, one of the key things that became apparent to me, but I didn't know this part of the background, was that you all were working in a way that naturally questioned things that we thought of as fixed.
Yes.
And because COVID had happened by the time, I mean, like we were in COVID, the first time we had a meeting was, I think, at the very end of 2020. I mean, we had been talking before that, but not about the thing that actually became this project. But by the end of 2020, we had our first like meeting with the group of collaborators, and that was not apparent to me yet, right? Like, it wasn't like I was like prescient about it. You guys were confusing to me, didn't know who was running anything. Like, how does this work? Like, who is in charge over here? And it took a while for both the ideas that we were talking about and the way that you were working to have me understand that what you all were bringing to the space is not just about this project, right? It's about a way of working and thinking about the institution that we work in, and museums as a concept that is not the kind of input that we would have gotten just from talking to other people in the field, right? Like we have to stop talking to everybody who we know, right? I know what every other museum is going to do when it comes to certain exhibitions. Like, if we really want to change who we are and how we deal with things, we have to turn over voice.
Well, let's talk for a minute about that tension point.
Yeah.
About what is this? I mean, when you're convinced enough we should move forward, but you don't know how.
Right. We don't have any money.
We don't know what we're going to do.
Right?
Right.
We don't even know what the scale is going to be.
What did that really feel like for you? I mean,
it was very anxiety producing during a period which was highly anxiety producing anyway. I mean, that first year of COVID from March 2020 to March 2021, which like encompasses the first like 4 or 5 months of our conversations, was the most stressful of my entire career. And there was a point, like, it's hard to look back on this. No, it's hard for me to look back on this now, but in April of 2020, the stock market had completely tanked and everybody was predicting that we would be in a depression. And I am the director of a university art museum, and the university at that point is predicting an enormous shortfall. And at that point, you're like, well, at some point, they're going to start cutting the non-academic essentials. And like, I mean, here we are in these two big buildings and all. So like, I had spent actually a fair amount of the early part of COVID, like working really hard to ensure that the university felt that we were relevant, right? Like, we opened really early. We opened in July of 2020, which seems impossibly early now, but felt like it was actually like we'd been closed forever. I managed to suck Candy and Catherine, the head of museum education and our chief curator, into creating wholly from scratch actual curriculum that professors could teach in the fall because we wanted to demonstrate. And they did it over like 2 months, right? And because like I was sitting there being like, they're going to cut the whole museum down, right? They're going to mothball us if things are really, really far south, and I have to just like demonstrate our value. So that's like.
Thank you for sharing that, because this is the backdrop.
Yeah.
You have so let me tell you we were just angry. I mean, it wasn't at you or to you specifically. It wasn't really directed at you, but you understand as the representative of the institution.
Yeah.
And you having the object that we were requesting access to work this out. That was charged certainly by the moment that we were in politically, right? Or not
Right.
politically, but culturally, what the police are doing in the streets, killing
Right.
our brothers and sisters. This is when, I mean, the request came prior to the ramp up of, the height of this in 2020, 2021. But the fervor, I think, with which we were approaching you was fueled by that.
Yes.
And it frankly didn't consider your anxiety around the art, the status of the art museum on campus. It wasn't considerate of that. I didn't even think about what you.
It's like so fascinating, right? That like we have never had this part of the conversation before, because like I wanted so badly to work with you guys. And as you know, in the very beginning, I was like, I don't know how we're going to fund this. Like I'm like, I don't know how we're going to do it. And it wasn't just, I mean, I really felt like in that first COVID year and into the second COVID year that I have never spent so much time, and every single person that I know in leadership says this about that time, in leadership of institutions like ours. I have never spent so much time trying to make sure that the team is okay, like emotionally okay, right? And some of that was trying to ensure that the team was still going to have jobs. And some of that was just like, I'm having, problems because COVID is going on forever. And at that point I had a kid in kindergarten who hadn't attended school in 9 months. And and so this was this moment where you guys started pushing in a way that was like, I knew it was so important and I knew I wanted to do it, but I had no capacity at some point. Like I can like go back and I can feel it like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I have the ability to bring the energy that this requires to this project. So
thank you for bringing us to this moment so I can at least say to everyone else personally now, this is you're just witnessing courage. You're witnessing courage, real courage happening. This is someone overcoming their fear of whatever might happen and making a bold choice. I commend you so much for that. It's such a big deal, y'all. It is a huge deal. And you have a gem here as the director of the art museum here, changing the scene of what art museums will do based on her bold leadership. And I experienced it as the person that was possibly most angry with her at the time. So, no, it's a real thing.
It's okay. I mean,
it's a real thing.
I'm like, am I sorry that you were angry with me? Yes. But I also am like, we have a relationship that has really evolved over time. And we have really gotten beyond, I hope, like, we've gotten to the point where we can actually really disagree, but like, I can be really frank with you about that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
we're going to have questions in just a minute. So can you hold on to that? Okay. So I will say that like one of the things that we needed to do as a team was actually get you experience you all here, right? Like the level of anxiety that happened before everybody arrived in July of 2021 was huge because we were pulling out objects and they're going to scan them and what does that mean, and we're turning over like all these things in the museum to different control and all of this, and then but once you're here, it's not that like the questioning and anxiety like completely went away, but it's like, oh, we can see what the work is. Right, like we can. We're not just talking about it anymore. We actually see it happening. right? And that was really powerful, was to have everybody here that first time.
I think that was milestone wise one of the most, after you saying yes, that we'll do this, and we didn't know how, we didn't know where all the money would come from, just having that faith, and we told her, like, we're gonna get it, don't worry, and you'll get some and we'll get some and we'll figure it out. But I'm proud where we've come to. There were absolutely challenges along the way. There were challenges getting it activated, but that moment of us all actually coming together and working side by side for almost a week, yeah, it was definitely a magic, and it allowed the capacity for everyone working on the team, the capacity for our humanity to be present and to grow. And it was like the auger, the fertile substance that I think the rest of the project really sprouted out of that moment. We gained a lot of love and trust in that particular week.
This is, I think that when we talk about milestones, like that was a really crucial week, and it was the beginning, as you note, about like, so this project deals with systemic racism and how it is embodied in this physical sculpture, right? And how you can understand the iconography based on that. And this is horrible, painful stuff. But I will point out that one of the things I will remember for the rest of my life is being at the opening and getting ready and having Wildcat, Ebony Brown, say that given how tough the work is that we've been doing and thinking about and asking people to engage physically, emotionally, creatively about this, is how much joy there is in the community. And that, to me, actually is like the future, right? It's not that you live in a joyous space because we've like created joy, right? You've actually live in a joyous space because we have gone through stuff together, right? And and we have come out into a space that none of us could have envisioned before. Like the project, the way it is, the way you see it now in the gallery, like that came together over the last 7 months, basically, which, by the way, is very unusual in the museum field, right? Totally stressed out.
We'll talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
What is the normal way it goes? How does it go? And what rules did we break to get to where we are?
So the normal way it goes is that, and this is not exclusively this way, but typically museums, an exhibition idea comes from a curator and they've been doing research for some time, or they're proposing a research area, and they go off and they do that and they propose an exhibition checklist of objects. And some of those objects might be from your collection. Some of them might be loans. And then eventually they present that idea to some people, and eventually some people approve it, presumably. And then you start actually involving the rest of the team in the project. And then the exhibition people lay out the things. And then you start talking to education and programming about planning programs around this concept. That is a super traditional way of doing that. That is not at all the way this happened. We basically like completely reversed it, right? So like we did a lot of programming up front. Some of it was public and some of it was like behind the scenes. So like that first week that you guys were here was basically behind the scenes, because like at that point half the museum was closed, and because you guys were doing all this work. But also like we knew we were going to do an exhibition, but we really like, well, we have this object and we know that there are many in other parts of the country, but like how would we talk about it in a way that will be fundamentally different than how museums have talked about this object and other objects like it? And is it possible for us to get to the point where it feels like a different space or in a different engagement? And so we didn't actually have a checklist in the beginning. I'm sure this was intensely frustrating for the curators and for the exhibition people. And we didn't actually, I think somebody told me the other day, we don't actually have a final checklist. This tells you a little bit about something about the process. Is that it wasn't like we were changing a lot at the very end. It was that it like we were doing design at the same time we were finalizing the checklist, so that the way it's integrated together is highly unusual for, especially for a museum of this size, and and the artistic product is integrated into the interpretation and programming in a way that is also highly unusual.
So if that's the revolutionary turn, what's the byproduct of that? What if you change up that equation, you get something different out in the end? How would you specify some things, at least, that came out differently, or you were whatever? How do you, what are the positive or even negative? What's different about the result?
So I have to say, like, one of the most important things that that I learned from this is we in the field, we have to ground everything we do in the object. We didn't put anything on this object, right? We didn't put like, oh, this is speculative about this object. The entire iconographic analysis that Janine Yorimoto-Bolt, the curator of American art, did for this object is completely traditional art historical analysis, but it is applied in fundamentally different ways and utilizing technology that has not been utilized to illuminate those elements, right? So part of my learning is like, is it's not that we have to change everything that we do because there's no value in the past stuff. It's that we actually have to take that past, those techniques and things like that, and apply them in ways that illuminate the object, use them as tools, right? Use the technology as a tool as opposed to fetishizing the technology, right? We're not just going to put technology in the galleries for a decade. Museums did that in the 1990s. But instead, we've printed all these 3D things at the makerspace in the engineering school, and we couldn't have done that 7 years ago, 8 years ago, right? But the biggest, like from a layout perspective, the biggest risk that we took was the iconographic analysis and the constellation of things in that space, because museums don't install objects like that. And they don't 3D print the different elements of it and put it around it so that you don't do that. But it is one of the things that people have pointed out is the most illuminating about it. And that brings me back to one of the most important lessons I have learned that I will absolutely carry with me for the rest of my career, is that my job as the director is to make sure that we come back to the objects and the artistic product, right? Like we have to ground things in the objects. So this exhibition, while it has tons of art historical have historical data, information, infographics, like every single part of that is grounded by real objects that actually take you from intellectualizing what you're hearing about the historical things and allowing you to enter it like physically and emotionally. And I think that is the power of real objects.
I think I'm hearing you say that perhaps inside of this exhibition, the juxtaposition of information and art objects provides a portal to the consideration of information and or dialogue around it in a way where I think in this country, people have chosen a side based on their programming up to whatever date. And there are things in there that inform you in a way that make you challenge whatever you thought you knew about in the past, in a way that puts you in a place of reconfiguration of information, whether it's a timeline or just the relevance of something, knowing that something even actually really happened. And then the slick move of we're moving from a more pedagogical style
Right.
into
As you walk in, right,
a more open contemporary art presentation,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't telling you as much about
No.
what to think.
And in fact, do you remember
what
the
to-
dialogue you and I had about we have to stop telling people what it is that we're trying to get them to interpret about the labels, right? I mean, there was a dialogue at the end about like how much we were going to explain about the pieces in the back. I mean, we did end up explaining. Mark was right about that one, but I think like, but that was the that is that like. We are trying to demonstrate that you can talk about really complex things in nuanced ways that are not, like you and I have talked about, like we're not just like coming at each other. And because we're trying to ground them in the object and in the different elements that make up that object and where do those elements come from and why were they included in this particular sculpture, it actually helps you, right? Like, you're like, oh, right. Like the bleeding heart, almost nobody notices the bleeding heart, right? It's like this big. Right? But that's like there for such a very specific reason. And it really helps you understand the history, not just of that object, about what is the message that object was trying to tell its contemporary audience. So that's, I mean, I've told you this before, but I mean, for me, this whole project has been completely, it's been transformational. And whether it was a moment of courage on my part or whether it was just like exhaustion and I was like, yes, we're just totally going to do it. I do think that, part of what COVID did, and I think I had been getting here anyway, but COVID and then the summer of 2020 and the murder of George Floyd really just like nailed this for me, which was if I am going to be in this kind of position and I am going to be here in Madison, we are going to do this work, right? Because we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of work to do as a community. We have a lot of work to do as a university. And as you pointed out already, I am really interested in the future of museums. And I really think that for like 25, 30 years of discussing diversifying the museum field, the most radical changes have come in the last 2 years at leadership level. And that is the way the wind is blowing. And I want to be part of that conversation. And I think that this project is not the way to do it. It is a way to approach it.
So you also just kind of stumbled into maybe some things we didn't get to.
Yeah,
I don't
sure.
know what time we have.
Eric, we
definitely
want questions.
people,
So why don't we
but-
let's just talk briefly about some of the things we didn't do, and then we'll segue into questions.
Well, what?
What do you want to talk about?
I mean, I have a couple. I'll keep mine brief. I've discovered what I've been loving about this project is that every time I think this part of it's over, I'm still learning more about the subject matter, and I'm looking forward to this continuing to tour in the spaces and places where there are interest, so that it can continue to do the work that it needs to do. But I'm also looking forward to the new pieces that get added on. And where am I going with this is Meta Warwick Fuller and Augusta Savage are two Black women sculptors who did absolutely beautiful pieces around the time of the Emancipation Group and in the spirit of freedom and emancipation. We caught some. We got him in Monia Lewis.
Right,
It's not.
right.
But I mean, when I started to really discover these artists' works, that it blew my mind. So I felt like, wow, that was a whole stone unturned. We could have certainly integrated them in some kind of way. But that's a whole other world. So that's kind of representative, like,
Yeah.
of the various stones that I think I've tripped over, that there's more there to dig. And but we know from all the stuff that's in there, we had to get down to an edit point, and this is the start of a conversation.
Yeah.
It's not the whole. It's not the end of it by any stretch. And I would say the other thing is that we experimented with our Nexus program, which brings underserved communities, younger, Black and brown folks, into the museum spaces that they usually don't feel welcome in, to learn and use technology to digitally preserve art and artifacts. We exercised that program here, and I think that the results were just amazing and stunning, and showed the potential of what that type of programming can do for our communities, and for the healing process that needs to occur between these spaces and our communities.
Yeah.
And I think we just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg. And I feel like, if I think I wanted to have created a chapter here that could continue to work with the museum in digitizing artifacts, et cetera, and was really seeded from the community. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying we certainly didn't do that.
Right.
We just experimented with it.
There was, there's so many of those. Yes, that would have been incredibly rich, right? Yes, that would have been incredibly rich. And it was, we had to choose at some point that we were going to narrow, because we can't do it all, but also because it became clear that we were trying to get to a point where we could start talking about it publicly. Explaining this project before the exhibition opened has been complicated. But also it's been complicated to raise money for it. It's been complicated because it feels so different. It's been really complicated to get press interest in it in advance. There's lots of press interest in it now, which is great, because the press who cover art understand how to cover an exhibition, right? They don't understand how to cover a process. And we also were not quite there on articulating the importance of the process.
We didn't know we switched.
We didn't know, right?
We switched. Yeah. We thought we were making an art product first.
Yes.
And Sanford intervened with that prompt of, well, there's not going to be a thing.
Yeah, that's he said at one point, we're not going to do a sculpture anymore, right?
Absolutely. And
that was really powerful for Sanford to do.
It was.
But now we're doing a sculpture.
We are.
And in fact, that's why you're here.
Yes, it is why I'm back in Madison at the moment, working with Quara. But that speaks to some of the uncovered ground on my side. But I'm glad that we've reached the milestones that we have. Mm-hmm. I'm glad the exhibition has had its opening, and that it will close, and that it will move on. But I am interested in how the conversation evolves. We know that this exhibition will not arrive as the same thing in each place that it goes to, because the intention is for it to use the process that we have stumbled upon, to use the object as a learning opportunity for that community. And so the art making and the response that comes out of that dialogue, it will be different, because it's different people and it's a different space, and that needs to happen too. So it's really just a prompt for the dialogue that starts the healing in these various areas. But this thing is in a lot of areas.
We've identified 6 or 7.
Besides the main 3 the biggins, the one in DC that's still up, the Boston one that came down. Those are the 10-foot bronzes.
Right.
Then there's a proliferation of the marble ones.
Right.
And then
here, I thought you were all special with your.
I know. Everybody's like, "Oh, that's
keeping
unique."
us from it.
No.
You could have been
there's another marble in New York City.
Meanwhile, it's still Amy, the one that's bold, because everyone else was like, I don't know. Took forever to get some of them.
It's too much work. Okay, so I do want to have a little bit of time for questions. I know that this has been a very different kind of conversation, but I think within the spirit of really trying to be much more transparent than museums typically are about process. But I think this is one of the things that I have learned from your group, from Mask, and from this process, is just like the importance of actually talking about these kinds of things and applying that to what it is that we do. So I know that, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I had a question, but it's been answered. I do have a comment
Okay.
I'd like to make, and as time has gone by, and I've observed more and more things and situations, I've come to realize, and I can articulate, that either individual people or groups of people will take things away from others as a way to assume power over them. And if an individual or a group of people are clear about what they are and what they own, nobody can take anything from you.
Yeah, the sort of clarity of like the idea that taking something away or applying something to a group of people is actually an act of power. It's absolutely accurate. I will say one interesting thing that has come up very recently is that there was a journalist who had spoken to Sanford and then spoke to me subsequently and said, we don't know, and Sanford didn't seem to know, and we're wondering if you know why it's called the Emancipation Group when there's only 2 people. Like, I guess that's technically a group. And I said, well, I don't know, actually, right? Like, we'll have to do, I'll have to go back and take a look. And I'll tell you, so I don't know yet, but I can tell you that, many of the versions that Mark is talking about have slightly different names. And it's not clear to me how they acquired those names or whether they acquired their names after. So, because all of the smaller ones were made before the big bronzes. So, but some of them are named the same name as the big bronze, and we don't know. I mean, but it's also like some of them are called the Freedmen's Memorial. Some of them are called the Emancipation Memorial. It's like fascinating. There's this fascinating research project, right? That is like, how did the names come to be attached to the individual objects in these collections? Yeah. So, yeah.
With how whitewashed and censored pretty much every curriculum, but primarily history has been in the past, currently is, and with the current political climate, how much more it's becoming. Does the Chazen have a plan for how you plan to move forward if those types of changes were to be made in Wisconsin with the increasing censoring of what can and cannot be taught?
So yes, I will. I'll repeat the comment. So the question is really about with the. I'm hoping I'm gonna phrase this correctly. So you correct me if I do not. With the increase in and with the prevalence of whitewashing of teaching of history and the increased movements in those directions, especially in certain states. Is there a plan from the Chazen's perspective to be able to respond or counteract that if that was to come to pass in Wisconsin? Is that about accurate? Okay. Well, one of the things I'm delighted to tell you about is that, we've told you that when we said yes to this, we didn't have any money attached to it. And we were really fortunate to be able to go to the Mellon Foundation, and they have funded part of the project. But one of the things that they have funded is the development of curriculum around this object. But specifically, although it could be adapted for, let's say, K through 12, it's actually really also about how do you create curriculum within non-academic learning spaces and museums so that you can give people toolkits to be able to not so much replicate the idea of taking everybody who has an emancipation group and giving you a curriculum about it, but how do you approach work like this? And it's not that work hasn't been done. Monuments Lab is doing some interesting stuff about monuments around the country, but it's actually that that part of the research and is that there is a lot of work to be done on getting us beyond where we are with that kind of curriculum. And so I don't have a direct answer to that, but I can tell you that I believe that museums are one of the key learning spaces that people can go to and engage with these kinds of questions. And it is incumbent on us to provide them with really, really good stuff to be able to engage with, right? And so what I would hope is that if that were to come to pass, like that is part of what we do here. We are embedded within one of the best research universities in the world, and we're all about education and teaching and learning. Is like that's part of what we're supposed to be doing, is actually making sure that we are providing that sort of framework. Yeah.
I had a question about, so in your process, you mentioned that at first you were scared during COVID that the funds might be cut for this, part of the university, and then you also said that later on with the murder of George Floyd, there was like a need to show like the university's thing. So why do you think that in these times of conflict we suddenly turn to art, but other times it's non-essential or academics or?
Well, why do we turn to art in times of incredible conflict? I think because humans actually do recognize that art of various forms. And I think one of the most powerful things about this project is that it's not solely a visual art project, right? Like, there's dance, there's music, there is poetry, there's visual arts. I mean, like, it is really multifaceted. Is that visual art has the ability to reach you in emotional places that is hard to intellectualize. And so when you are in a space where you are like confronted with like really anguishing situations, one of the things that you can do to help process is actually listen to music. It's actually watch somebody. I mean, one of the more powerful videos, one of my milestone moments, is this moment where Keon Harold, who's a jazz musician, was in the gallery with the object, and his dialogue confrontation with the object is one of the most like perfect examples of like taking this very personal anguish for him, this very personal moment, and actually channeling all of that emotion and energy through his art in a way that is completely understandable when you see it. Like you get how, and you don't have to understand exactly what he is thinking about it. You can feel it. And I think that is like, when something like COVID happens, like we can't, that is a trauma that is happening to everyone at the same time, right? Now, you're not experiencing the trauma in exactly the same way. It may have been very freeing to be like at home because you're more of an introvert, and it's like really draining to be out. Like there's lots of ways in which, but the actual trauma of COVID and then the summer of 2020, right, is like, so when I say the thing about like, I really felt like compelled about this is I'm going to just tell you that when the protests happened in Madison after George Floyd's murder, and during that period, when there were all the protests on State Street and into the campus, there was a lot of pressure on many institutions, including cultural institutions, to come out with statements of allyship, right? The black frame on your Facebook page. And the people who are on staff here who were present at the time will remember actually that I told the team that I was not going to do that. It's not because I didn't believe in being an ally. It's because the institutional voice is like, we haven't done the work. Right? Like, and it turns out, if you followed this, that the Met and the Guggenheim got completely lambasted for this, right? And I was like, I am not going to put something out there that is not where we are, right? And so part of that was, okay, how can we get there? Right? And so it was a call for action, and it breaks my heart that that happened in that moment. But I also I think part of my responsibility as a leader of this museum is not to just bend to the pressure of the external, well, every museum we know is putting up the black square. And I'm like, yeah, but these are some of the most exclusionary institutions in the world. You may feel like you're an ally, but I don't really know that that's for you to define. That's not actually for me to define. That's for other people to define for us. And in order for that to happen, we have to change who we are and the work that we do. And that started working in my brain. And so when we got to the point where we were really actually talking and we got past the I'm angry part, right? is and we're in it now, is that it was very clear to me that this is the work that we had to do. Right. And that, again, I just go back to if I'm going to be here, right? And I serve at the pleasure of the chancellor, right? Is if I'm going to be here, then we're going to do this work. And I just am not going to be afraid anymore of what's going to happen. Yeah. Yeah. You have a follow up. I mean, what's the worst that can happen, right? They fire me. It will be okay. Right? Even if I got...
In the future, what you say you're going to keep doing this, what do we have to look forward to?
Oh, I don't know yet. I mean, we have lots of thoughts about, Mark was talking about, this is not the end point for this project, but also, as you may be aware, half of the museum is closed again because we're doing this capital project. Well, this is actually a huge opportunity for us because we want to reimagine the permanent collection installation. And Catherine Alkaskas, who's the chief curator here, is leading that. And the timing wasn't intentional in this way, but doing this project and having the entire team go through this process is actually crucial to doing something truly innovative in that, right? And that will be, in the next 2 to 3 years, right? So to me, that is sort of the next thing, right? The next thing isn't another emancipation.
No, it's applying what we learned back into the space around the objects that are in the collection so that more people can experience them in the way that we through this new portal that we've discovered that doesn't exclude people inherently, that tells the fullness of the stories behind the objects, etc., and just more engaging because it's true. I think it's exciting to be able to refill those. What is it? How many square feet is it? That's be 3 and 4, the third and fourth floors, right?
It's the third and fourth floors. What do you think, Christine?
50-ish? Yeah.
So probably 60,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Right? It's a lot.
And we documented that, scanned that space before all the artwork came down because we heard about the situation, let's put it that way. And for us, from Matt's perspective, wasn't something that I think Amy was like, why? I don't, why do you want to do that? And
I should know that every time I say that, okay, there's a reason why we need to do that.
But we said, how are you going to know what to fix if you don't take an accurate representation of what it was in the first place? Right. If it's just empty now, then everybody's freestyling. Oh, let's do this, let's do that. But maybe you're not really focusing on what the problem is anymore because it's been erased. Yeah. So we did document that entire space in order for you to
so you really will be able to see eventually how it's approaching differently. And I think as a design tool, it's actually going to be really useful to have being able to say are we really questioning things appropriately as we're going through the process. So I know we're now a little over time, so I want to acknowledge that and just thank you guys.
you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
my dear.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. And I look forward to getting your feedback about the project, about the exhibition, about the museum, and I hope to see you at other things soon. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us.